Well, good morning, everybody. I want to start you off today with some radar data. We're looking at the radar data that's located here between Galveston and Houston. And the storms we're watching here came through last night between about 6 o'clock and 7:30. And there's 1,000 different things that we could sit here and diagnose and discuss about the storm, but I want to talk about the most damaging feature with it. And what we're going to be looking at here is going to primarily be this Boeing segment right here. So as you watch this storm, you'll notice that one piece of it is racing out ahead of the rest. Watch it one more time. See this piece right in through here? It goes right over the top of downtown Houston. If I stop this and kind of walk you through it, I'll show you what I'm really focusing in on here. It's this right here. What you have is on the back side of the storm, on its rear side, we have an inflow jet. In other words, there's air descending on the back side, and then it is racing out ahead of the storm like this, and it's kicking the front edge of this storm out. Now, this is a relatively small example of a Boeing segment of a line. Sometimes these can stretch hundreds of miles. In fact, the one that hit Iowa back in August of 2020, one of the more recent big derecho events that hit the United States, that one almost stretched north to south the entire width of Iowa. So what's going on here? Well, there's just very strong back-to-front flow happening right in through this area. Can we forecast this, a day in advance, an hour in advance? No. We watch the evolution of the storm as it comes through, which is why severe thunderstorm warnings and tornado warnings come out literally moments before the event. But as you can see, it goes right through downtown Houston. Now, this is again using that tool, radar scope, one of my favorites. I'm going to go up and I want to select velocity, because remember, what we can also measure with our radar is the phase shift in the return echoes with respect to the radar beam position. So let's stop that and step through it piecewise here. Now, the radar is here. So what's happening is that it's blasting out a wave that goes in this direction, hits the precipitation, and bounces back. If that precipitation were not moving, what we would get is a zero phase shift. But because it's coming toward the radar, it's the same thing as like a batter swinging a bat, hitting the object back toward. You actually get an increase in the velocity in the direction of the beam. We can measure that phase shift, and those phase shift differences can be mathematically turned into a velocity. All right, all of that is to tell you that we can come in here with radar and hover over this and tell you how fast it was moving. Now, as you can see, I measured a wind going into Houston of 118.6 miles an hour, but we have to be very careful with this. The radar beam goes out from the radar, which is here, and up. So that is actually, look right up here with me. When I hover back over that, watch right here, you'll see that wind of almost 120 miles an hour, let's get that 119, there it is. That was at 2.1 thousand feet. So we're at 2,100 feet. Now, that doesn't mean we didn't have strong winds at the surface. We may have had wind gusts over 100 miles an hour at the surface, and certainly some of the damage I saw would indicate such winds. And unfortunately, I believe there were fatalities last night because of this. But that's hit a major metropolitan area, and this will likely be one of our nation's billion-dollar weather disasters that'll go on the map as we watch that evolve throughout this year. So just wanted to show you a bit more about radar data and how we can use it. And again, just an incredibly powerful storm. Now, from here, what I want to do is I want to take you out and show you some broader picture things about this. By the way, what's coming toward you today? We're going to talk about this pattern if we think it's going to break. We're going to talk about what we see in terms of moisture up to this point, which has been interesting. I'm going to compare it to 19 and 93, so all that's coming. We will then at the end of this do a 5-model long-range forecast, and I'm going to talk about this one feature that I'm getting very concerned about, all right? And we'll finish with some international stuff. But the map I left you on while I was telling you that is poweroutage.us. We can hover over Texas and still see that this morning we're tracking over 800,000 people without power. Louisiana, about 160,000. And Mississippi, as these storms continued in the overnight, it's got 10,000 without power. On satellite, these were impressive. Now, there's so many different pieces to this today. We have one low exiting. We have another one that moved through the upper Midwest going toward the Great Lakes in Ontario. There's another following it that's going to give us severe storms here later today. But what I want you to see is the complex of storms that rolled through Texas last night. And I want to zoom in a bit on those. So using kind of this regional feature here on the College of DuPage site, I want you to watch just the depth of these storms. I was so focused on them, I almost missed what was going on behind them, because as those storms rolled through, and these were deep, take a look at this dust storm generated by thunderstorm outflow here in West Texas. I mean, that is a massive and fast-moving dust storm. And you can also see, look down here in the Gulf of Mexico, or in this part along the Rio Grande, I always say Rio Grande do Sul, so that's the way I typically think in my head. Anyway, the Rio Grande, this is all wildfire smoke from Mexico, and some of the haze that you have up here is actually wildfire smoke from the fires that were in northern Alberta that we talked about at the beginning of the week. In the overnight hours, these storms continue to press forward, and early this morning, they're moving over the Florida Panhandle and continue to do damage this morning. Plus, we followed this up with some deeper convection here. Just thinking about all of this, in fact, I think it just rolled 6 a.m. There we go. That's the new data here. And this is kind of my newest map that shows the last 72 hours of total accumulated precipitation. And as you note, just in the last 72 hours, we have a strip right in through this area that has picked up in some places another 5 inches of rain, some places a bit more than that. The rain from the slow-moving low to the north of this, remember, at the beginning of this week, it was a system over Arizona that's now sitting off the coast spinning. The system that's followed it, bringing in some wetter conditions into parts of the Corn Belt. We've had the rains that have been moving through the Canadian prairie. There's just so much water in this pattern. That's not to say places aren't being missed. We'll look at those in a few seconds, but that's through early this morning. If I take you back over the last week, now this is a different color bar. I apologize. This will all be changing for you soon. Notice this one goes from 0 to 24 inches. My old color bar only went up to 10. And I often found that we were saturating that color bar, not seeing all of the features I want to see. But your last 7 days, just to kind of hone in on that same region that's been hit time and time again with incredibly flooding rains down here. Some places just in the last week grabbing between 6 and 10 inches of rain, plus what we're still adding this morning from these storms. Stepping it out a bit further, here are our ranks, our month-to-date precipitation ranks. And just take note of what's gone on from this part of Texas all along the Gulf Coast, the extremely wet weather that was earlier in the month that came through Tennessee, Kentucky, that made it over into the Carolinas. Again, wiping out that early season risk I thought I saw for drought that was spreading from North and South Carolina into Virginia. Iowa had been a main focus for me this week, just showing how dry things have been. And just picking up on how wet things have been. Forgive me there. That was not an intentional slip up here. But, we can just see why there's such delays in getting a crop in, given how wet it's been. Okay, let's go out a little bit farther. This is now a percent of normal map. So we're kind of hitting this from several different ways, but trying to look at the same scenario, how wet it's been. And over the last 30 days through yesterday morning, so this has always got a 1-day lag on it, we can still find these areas down in Texas that are having 8 to 10 times the normal amount of rainfall. And that did not include what just came through this area yesterday. We can still find some drier areas. In fact, we were getting really, really hot into parts of Florida until the storms came through yesterday. We can see up into parts of the Northeast. We have several areas, like up in Maine, it's been quite dry. Also in parts of New Jersey. And again, we're watching this area here, parts of the Snake River Valley and the Columbia Basin that have been drier than average during this stretch of weather as well. From there, let's now look at some other metrics with respect to this moisture. And the first is going to be a comparison at 40 inches or 100 centimeters to the soil moisture map we had on January 1 versus now. So as I've said before, hydrologically, what all of this has done is completely erase what has been a multi-season drought issue for a big section of the country. And so this gets us into an entirely different regime. Just think about what's been recovered here. And we have to consider that as we press forward, because our drought monitor has changed a lot. This is the newest one, updated yesterday, about an hour and a half after I recorded, and we've continued to watch drought area being just squeezed and shrunken. It's really starting to fade. A couple of things we really have to discuss on this. Now, I'm in the Midwest, and I have Midwest growers asking me all the time, what is our summer drought risk? Now, when we think about that summer drought risk, we've got 3 tools at our disposal. What's our current drought situation, looking again at soil moisture too? What do the models say, which we're going to do, of course, in just a few minutes? And then what are the ocean temperatures up to, right? Those are the only 3 things that I can look at that give me that longer range, that seasonal outlook. So you've been staring at the drought monitor map. And while we've seen this drought area being reduced, it is still anchored in parts of Kansas despite some better rains. But take note, if you are in the Midwest and through here, where do we not have drought? This has been faded and gone away. I mean, we've had moisture get in this area. There's not drought to the south. There's not drought to the southeast. There's not drought to the east. There's not drought to the west. There's not drought way out west. If there's drought, it's in Mexico, and it's still partly in western Canada, although there's been better rains coming through the Canadian prairie. And then it's down here in the southwest and still in the northern Rockies. So you have to understand that when we start looking out there longer range, we're looking for any preseason indicator that we're going to stop the flow of moisture from the Gulf of Mexico, for example. It's not coming through here. In fact, as any flow comes through the Gulf of Mexico, it's going to pick up additional moisture from how wet things already are in the soil. So this is one of the things that keeps feeding into this very active pattern that we're in. Now, I mentioned a few moments ago how much change there's been. So I decided to make a change map, a sliding change map here, taking you all the way back to late November last year, just after Thanksgiving. That was what our drought monitor looked like. And this is what it looks like to be taken from about 45% drought coverage down to 13%. So that was then at the end of last fall, and this is now. That's a significant shift overall. Now, with all of the weather that's been in place, many are recalling two recent really wet years. One, of course, was 2019, which we've had a look at. If you're curious why 2019 and 2024 don't completely compare against one another, that's because by the end of May of 2019, everywhere that you saw the number one was the new wettest May that was on record. And what was different about 19 was the size and strength of the southeastern ridge. See how dry it was here? We had a deep, deep ridge here and a trough that just continued and persisted. And the jet stream just streaked across the country in the direction of those areas, sometimes at speed over 200 miles an hour. So this was a precipitation frequency thing. I know I mentioned yesterday that parts of Iowa may get a 3 to 4 day break in the rain. Some parts of it, not all, but some parts. And many of you were critical of that, saying, you need more, I need more, I need more. I understand that. But in 2019, you didn't get that. It was like every other day that it rained in this area. So just a point to make here about that pattern. Another year I tossed out was 1993. Now, 1993's flooding problems weren't for the whole country happening in May. There was a June problem. And what was going on in May set up June, and that was how dry things were getting here. And already beginning to get wet toward the end of the month, especially in the central United States. And the West was very wet as well in May. But when you flip that year over to June, this is what happened. We saw a massive ridge of high pressure sit right here. There was another one, it's almost off the map, that kind of sat like that. So what did you get? You got flow coming out of the east, going upslope into parts of Montana, Wyoming, and also into Oregon, even into Washington. We were continuing to get this. You then had flow curling around in this direction, pulling Gulf moisture, and right in the middle was this nearly stationary boundary. Now this is June through early July, and it was on that boundary that we just saw storms roll every day in this direction, creating this massive flooding problem. It was a flood of a century. That's what we would call that particular type of flood, and it flooded out the Mississippi River in a big way. So I just thought it'd be good to bring those up, to look at a few different things. Many of you, I actually got an email yesterday. I didn't get to look at this yet. It says, well, what got us there? What was the pattern? Well, it was those two high pressure cells, and you could link them to all sorts of different teleconnections around the world. But the reality of that is that I'm showing you this so I can compare you where the current models think June's going to go. So stuff that in the back of your head for a few moments. This is where we are right now, okay? And what I've got here is kind of a continuation of a pattern we've been seeing. What is it? It's troughs sneaking around like this. This ridge failed to stay over the west. And because it continues to retreat and strengthen here, north of Hawaii, between that and the Aleutian Islands, it's going to allow troughs of low pressure to continue to form, diving across the United States like this. And we're even going to watch this guy right here get slingshot straight across the country. I've been talking about it all week, but ready, watch. Here's the newest update on Sunday into Monday. There it comes, about ready to get grabbed by this trough and just tossed right there. So it's going to go from here to here in 24 hours, just screaming across the country. And this is why all the way through mid to late next week, we have a multi-day severe weather threat from the persistence of these troughs just curling around. Now there's our ridge. That's the one we're watching to see if it can reposition itself to be more of a blocker on these systems rather than allowing them to kind of just usher themselves through the country. But we're all the way out to Friday, May 24th, getting out to the 25th and 26th. There goes another one. And the European Artificial Intelligence wants to show some sort of high over low, highly amplified look here. That could slow it down a few days as we finish the month and bring in a ridge of heat and drier conditions on the back side of this trough, wetter conditions on the east side, wetter conditions into the northwest here. But I don't know how long that's going to slow down. We're just using the models to get a hint on this. Persistence has certainly been the smarter thing to go with in the forecast for a while. So we look at all of that and start to think about what it's going to do. And we just begin today with our all hazards weather map here early this morning. We have our flood issues down here. Also right in that same spot that was still showing up in the drought monitor, flood issues in parts of Virginia, fog north of that, stronger winds here in parts of the Pacific Northwest getting into Montana. Looking at where our rivers are flooding this morning, just a quick update on water.noaa.gov, looking only at gauges that are in action, minor, moderate, or major flood stages, and of course, we expect to see this, but notice what's coming down the Mississippi. Right now, the Mississippi River is the highest it's been in a year, and our current values are up here around 27 feet above low stage. So that river is taking in all of this moisture as it filters into its tributaries and then comes down into Memphis here. So we got to watch that very carefully going toward June as well. All right, today, severe storms. This is from the Storm Prediction Center. We've got a couple of areas to keep an eye on, the northern plains and also down here from Louisiana over to Georgia. And then as we look into tomorrow, that front's going to continue to slide forward. So we have this risk of storms coming through this area, the severe storms down here in the southeast. And then getting into the day on Sunday, we're going to watch the central plains. Now remember, this is the time frame where that trough gets slingshot here around the broader trough tossed into this area. So this is day 3 or Sunday. Day 4, we're going to keep an eye on that same region and getting into day 5. This would be Tuesday. Broad area opens up in the Midwest for severe weather. So we have 5 days over which we're going to be keeping a close eye on severe storms. Just to keep you up to speed on what's going on with severe storms, we are right now way above average on the accumulation of them, especially with wind. We've had nearly 4,000 reports of wind damage, over 800 reports of tornadoes, and over 2,300 reports of hail damage. If you want to see what that looks like compared to average, tornado reports, now again, this was through the 15th. The map I just showed you was through today. You can see where we currently stand. On hail reports, we're right on our average, and on wind reports, we're well above our average by about 1,000 reports here. And this does not include, these maps do not include what just happened last night. So the point to say here is that this really active patterns is set to continue, and we now need to dig into the models to at least see what they're suggesting. All right, so early this morning, this is what the high-res NAM is picking up on. So we can see the load this evening kicking off the severe storms here. Why these scattered showers and thunderstorms embedded in this last push coming through parts of the eastern Corn Belt over toward the mid-Atlantic and up the northeast. We will keep an eye out on strong to severe storms to its south. As we play this forward into Saturday, again, more storms rolling through here. That's that area. Remember, we saw on Saturday for the risk of some stronger storms as the front slides through. So this is what could kind of ruin parts of this, what could be a 4-day stretch to get things done in Iowa, some isolated storms here. And then we get into Sunday, and we're going to keep an eye on the risk of storms that night coming out of this complex here, which is part of that slingshotted, I don't know if that's a proper term here, but trough that came out from the base of that broader trough over the west. All right, as we continue, let's go our 5-model look. This is the European Artificial Intelligence forecast for the next 7 days. Let's add to that the NBM 7-day. Nope, that's the WPC. This is the NBM. WPC, NBM. Wet Canadian Prairie, wet western Corn Belt to the upper Midwest, more flooding south, filling in the gaps here in the middle, but this pattern isn't quitting. If it's drier in the northeast, drier in this part of Kansas, maybe the panhandles as well, but that's a pretty common signal, I think, in all the models at this point. This would be the European model, next 7 days, and this is the GFS. And I'll come back to this slide real quick, and let's just let's go see where the models are different. We continue to see this GFS versus European wet streak showing up here in the in the comparison between these two models. All right, from there, let's now have a look, at some probability maps. Next 7 days, chance of getting an inch. And as we play this forward, adding the 4 days that follow, this is your 10-day probability of getting an inch of total precipitation. And if we look up to 2 inches, we now see a 50 to 80% chance through here of getting 2 inches, some heavy rains coming through the Canadian prairie, and of course down here in the Mid-South and along the Gulf Coast. That's our wettest area. If we look to see who's going to be on the drier side of things, it'll be again a discussion watching how far into Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas we get the drier conditions going forward. But there has been some recent rains getting into this region. Not been perfect, it's not undone the drought, but there has been rain getting into this region. All right, models. We'll go ahead and look at these. I didn't create that new animation I told you just yet. I'll work on that. But playing this through Saturday into Sunday, and working our way out there into Monday. Now you're just going to watch on Monday. You can see the broader trough circulating here. Into Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of next week. We're just not slowing these systems down. As you watch it again, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, we just continue to see systems rolling through mid to late next week, closing up any window that had to open for planting. So as we get out there beyond this, at the end of this month, is there any hint of a pattern change? I think the pattern slows down but doesn't change. And that's what I think the very end of this month is really going to be described as. So that's why when we look out there, we see that the 24th through the 26th, they've now expanded and even moved farther to the north, the area they've got the risk for the heavy precipitation. And our models suggest that the very end of the month, this goes all the way out to the end, continue to keep this same corridor wet, with the GFS being the wettest in terms of stretching that wet weather back toward the west. So there's your 3 model comparison for week 2. If we start talking about temperatures, it's a question of where the heat has been versus where it's not been. And since the beginning of April, it's not been in the west. We have recovered, 4 or 5 day stretches of heat, and we just had that in California's Central Valley. First significant push of heat in a long time. But it was not enough to outdo what happened in April and the front half of May for how cool it's been in the western United States. Meanwhile, the Ohio River Valley has been the warmest compared to their historical averages. So again, just compared to averages, looking at ranks here, very, very warm in this area. I have a concern about this. And my concern is that if the ocean temperatures continue to trend in the way they've been trending, this might flip by the time we get into summer. And I'll make a case for that in these last few slides over here. But next, let's talk about temperatures. Where we have the risk of frost is shown here over the next 7 days. And if we look at what those maximum temperatures are up to, let's blow that up a couple times. Here we go. Friday's highs getting into Saturday and Sunday. Notice the cool down in the northwest, the cool down here in parts of California, the heat that's in southern Texas, the wet weather leaving this part of the Carolinas up toward Virginia, keeping it cooler. This is now Monday into Tuesday of next week. Much cooler air coming in on the backside of this. This is when the broader trough lives here. And we're going to see the wet weather continuing, keeping those temperatures away from heat next Wednesday into Thursday. But take a look at the cold that's coming in the west. That is just the reflection of the trough. In fact, it's the cause of the trough. That's what gives us troughs, cold air in the lower atmosphere. From that going forward, how many GDDs are we going to get this next week? So this is well below normal for the north, but way above average for the south. And so in the middle, we can also expect strong winds. But this is total GDDs forecast by the National Digital Forecast Database over the next 7 days. From here, let's go out and look at day 5 through 10. Now, starting to see this cooler air coming out of the Canadian prairie into the northern plains, we start to be concerned if our temperatures are starting to dip down here, 5 to 8 degrees cooler than average, if there's a frost that could come through. I'm going to take a look at that here in a few moments. But this is the day 10 through 15. And is there any agreement in that in the European? Well, let's just watch. There's the next 5 days. There's day 5 through 10. Day 10 through 15. So I've seen the models do this repeatedly, try to take cooler air and move it into this area, and they seem to break on it. Because if we can build warmth back in the west, then you could get a pattern that does something like this, which would shut this all down. But the models have faked us out multiple times on that, which means this will be the most important trend I watch over the weekend. But I mentioned a few moments ago frost. So what I would like to do is show you a probability map looking at the chance of getting below 40 Fahrenheit. So what I'm concerned about is out there in that day 5 through 10 time period, like right here, for example, on the 23rd. The Canadian Prairie getting to the Northern Plains, I mean, we've got a better than 50% chance of being in the upper 30s for lows. And we just get concerned that if we see that, we might have low temperatures in some places, especially in low-lying areas, dipping down there and getting pretty cold. So I want to be aware that that is a potential threat. But right now, I don't have solid evidence that we dip down there below 30 or 32. So, for example, if I click on the probability of being below 32, you don't see it. It's maybe in the Canadian Prairie, like right here. But we'll just keep an eye on this. This will be an important thing for us to continue to watch. Again, we're out there like the 23rd, 24th, 25th watching for that. All right, finally, long range. This was just released yesterday, and it is their new CPC 1-month forecast for June. Now, in my opinion, the CPC did the best on May. It wasn't perfect, but they did the best of all the other models. And this is what I'm starting to get concerned about. And the reason for that is, notice the flip in the pattern. You see, the warmest air has been here compared to historical averages. And there's some suggestion it's moving. And if you see cooler weather here with warmer in the northwest, this implies blocking high over low. And that would keep storms rolling through this area, but different trajectory. No longer coming up out of the southwest, but out of the northwest. And June's a summer month. And so we're curious if this is showing up in other forecasting systems. So here is the European model outlook for June. And again, it's gone over drier in through this corridor. And it's got, something looking wet in that area. There's similarities in this overall. What if we went out here and looked at the pressure pattern in June? I bring this up, and this is the new forecast from the European seasonal, because this is not looking like 1993. Remember that about 20 minutes ago? You see, in 1993, there was higher than average pressure here in June, and higher than average pressure here in June. And the seasonal model's not seeing that. I'm going to come back to the seasonal model in just a few seconds, because I want to first give you the new update on the 3 months of summer given to us by the Climate Prediction Center. And they've had this in their forecast now for the last 3 months. This has been their prediction for summer for the last 3 months that they've done this. They're suggesting heat is in the west. I know you're going, wait, it's warmer here. I know, but the main heat anchoring here. And that's where they got the driest conditions bridging the gap between the drought that is in Mexico and the drought that's in Western Canada, far Western Canada. So that's their new summer outlook. Now, what does that compare to the European? So let's come in here and let's look at precipitation. I'm going to show you a seasonal anomaly for June, July, August. And you start to see some similarities here overall in the precipitation pattern. And my biggest concern is that we get ridging maybe in the southwest, maybe it's in the northwest, but in either case, storms cascade over the northern side of this, giving us a hot and stormy summer in the midsection of the country. Now that's June, July, August. Let's go look at model number 2. Actually, model number 3. We did CPC first. Then we looked at the European model. This is the National Multi-Model Ensemble. And as we talked about early in this week, it very much backed off on its forecast June, July, August for the dryness here. And it's trying to anchor it into this area, suggesting storms come over that ridge and cascade down ahead of an active hurricane season. Let's add to this another forecast model. How about the IRI multi-model probability forecast? And I'm going to give you an international view on this. It's the forecast they just released on June, July, August precipitation probabilities. And if we go back to from May to April, just take a look at what their differences are for June, July, August. There we go. So watch right in through here. That was the old forecast. This is the new. See how they've anchored the risk of the driest conditions being here ahead of an active hurricane season. Also take note, this is an early onset and then much drier than normal dry season. We're coming right here off like the Bolivia Ridge down toward Paraguay into southern Brazil and Argentina. Could we go into a winter drought scenario in Argentina? that needs to be discussed very carefully as well. Take note that June, July, August is also expected to be dry throughout parts of the Russian wheat belt, right in through this corridor. Can't ignore that either. So we've now seen, I went up to 4 or 5. Let's go ahead and add another one to this. This is the JMA. It's a Japanese seasonal forecast model. I've never shown it to you before. I've vetted it, I've looked at it, but I often don't show it to you. But let's look at it. Several panels here. Can you focus in on this one first? When you look at this, this is precipitation rate. And you see these colors representing wetter, these representing drier. Now, as I look at it, I see most of this corridor looking wetter, and that would line up with the European, the NMME, and also what the government just released. So I'm seeing some consistency here. But what I'm really wanting to look at in this is where it's suggesting the MJO may live this summer, June, July, and August. I'm concerned that if it does live over in phase 1, which is here, that we end up getting a pattern that looks a lot like this in the month of July. And what is it? It's some sort of ridging here that at times moves into the west, and also ridging there. There's your warmth in the northeast. There's your warmth coming into the west due to the proximity of that ridge. And this would give us that look, of maybe like high over low, dropping flow in, and then having to bump up again over a ridge here. And that would be very consistent with the pattern that we've been seeing. So I have to say, if I can go back and find it, I can find pretty good reason to agree with this. And I'm mostly concerned that we return back to something we've seen on repeat for the last 33 years in July. And that is this ridge event that's pushing toward the western United States, such that the flow comes here and does something like that. We've seen that more often than not in the last 33 years. And what it's done is it's given us a summer precipitation pattern that takes drought and anchors it in through this area, kind of along that, and also down here across Mexico. And because that flow has done this, we open up storms to northwest flow in this whole area. And that's why I'm still kind of sitting on this idea of western U.S. summer heat and drought risk, and central U.S., starting from the Canadian Prairie, getting all the way to the Gulf Coast, active storms rolling out of the north. I'm guessing for a hot, and literally, I know I tossed in the word guessing. I don't know if that was a Freudian slip or what, but I feel that way right now. But that's my thought, that we're going to get a hot, stormy summer in this area. Okay, so where do we finish? I want to show you the last 30 days, or 20 days in this case, looking at temperatures compared to average, and just show you how cold it got throughout much of Russia's main agriculturally productive area, especially getting down into this region. The Black Sea is here. Okay, we had a frost hitting a lot of those acres. It got cold in Argentina early as well, and there's our west coast colder pattern. I bring all this up because over the next 10 days, remember how yesterday I told you that the AI model was first to pick up on the dryness? Take a look. The new dynamical model did it as well. Picked up on that dryness in Russia. It's still got it extremely wet down here into southern Brazil, but better rains coming into like Paraná, Mato Grosso do Sul, and southern Mato Grosso, which will be key for the safrinha crops in this area. Still a large hole of dry conditions here, but I wanted you to see this international look at precipitation over the next 10 days as we finally wrap up this week. I really appreciate you guys hanging on with me this week. We discussed a lot of things. There's a lot of anxiety, I think, in this pattern, and we'll just keep watching it over the weekend and give you my notice update on Monday. Have a good rest of your weekend, and we'll talk soon. Thanks.